What's going on, guys? It's your boy Distant Coder, and welcome back to another episode of answering your ruling questions. Now, we're gonna get right into it, but don't forget, if you want to take part in this series, leave your ruling questions in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to go over them and read them so that I can maybe answer your ruling question in a later video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so this first ruling question comes to us from Master of Pendulum, and they ask, ruling question, if Sky Striker Ace Hayate attacks into my monster that has more attack and sends Ray off the effect of Hayate, does Ray trigger? So, in the case of Sky Striker Ace Hayate, her effect will trigger after damage calculation. So in the damage step, there are 5 sub-steps of the damage step, and the one right after damage calculation is the after damage calculation sub-step, in which Hayate would activate, at which point Hayate will activate to send the Ray from the deck to the graveyard, and only once you move past the after damage calculation sub-step, you move to the end of the damage step, and it's at that point that the Hayate is actually destroyed from the field and sent to the graveyard. So Hayate will foolish the Ray to the graveyard before it itself is destroyed from the field. So at the point where Hayate is destroyed from the field during the end of the damage step, the Ray is already in the graveyard. So right after Hayate will be destroyed by that battle, the Ray is in the grave, so it will be able to trigger in order to summon itself back from the graveyard. Alright, this next ruling question comes to us from the Clever Gamer, and this is a very, very good question. A lot of people have been asking, so I can't wait to get into it. They are asking, can you use IP Masquerena to summon Underworld Goddess of the Closed World and still use an opponent's monster as material, or does Masquerena's monster you control clause override it? So essentially, IP Masquerena has an effect that allows you to quick link summon on your opponent's turn. Now, Underworld Goddess of the Closed World says that you are allowed to link summon it by using one monster your opponent controls. So basically what they're asking is, if you use the effect of IP, can you still use one monster your opponent controls? Because IP does read that it link summons using monsters you control. So essentially, we don't know for sure how it's going to be ruled, because Goddess of the Underworld Underworld Goddess, is not out yet. However, we do have precedent with a card called Microcoder. So Microcoder is a monster that has an effect that says if you would use a Cyberse monster as a link material for the link summon of a Code Talker, you are allowed to use Microcoder in your hand. So in this situation, if IP Masquerade is activated and you're attempting to make something like a Decode Talker, you are allowed to use the IP Masquerade on your field and the microcoder from your hand. So basically, the way IP is worded is not exactly how it's intended to function. IP just says link summon, essentially. So the fact that it says monsters you control is overwritten by the effects of something such as Microcoder, which allows it to be used from the hand, or Underworld Goddess of the Closed World, that allows it to use a monster your opponent controls. So again, do ask your head judge when the card does release, but for now, the way that I strongly believe it will be ruled is that you will be allowed to use one monster from your opponent's side of the field, due to the precedent that is set by the ruling that we have about Microcoder being allowed to be used in the hand when you use the effect of IP Masquerena. Okay, so this next ruling question comes to us from a Remix, and they ask, if I have Lyna the Light Charmer equipped to Union Carrier, can I send both to grave to special Familiar Possessed Lyna from the deck? So I know that this ruling has been a big debate for the past couple of weeks, and I can't wait to get into it and actually explain to you guys why it works the way that it does. So here's the thing. Familiar Possessed Lyna says that you have to send a face-up Lyna the Light Charmer from your field and a light monster from your field to the graveyard in order to summon it from the deck. So, the correct ruling is that Familiar Possessed Lyna cannot use a face-up Lyna the Light Charmer that is face-up in your spell and trap zone in order to be used to summon it from the deck. The reason why is because, yes, the card does say that all you need to do is send the face-up Lyna the Light Charmer from your field to the graveyard. However, the intended functionality of the card was that you send Lyna the Light Charmer as a monster from your field to the graveyard, not as a spell or trap. There was never an interaction that came up with this, because there was never a card, for the most part, there was rarely a card that could ever have the Lyna equipped in the spell and trap zone, so this interaction never really came up. However, there is an FAQ entry in the the OCG database that does specify that the Line of the Light Charmer must be in the monster zone in order to be used for the summon of Familiar Possessed Lyna from the deck. So for this very reason, we have the confirmation that the functionality of the card is that it's meant to send the Line of the Light Charmer from your monster zone to the graveyard and not from the spell and trap zone. So for this reason, the Line of the Light Charmer must be in the monster zone when sent to the graveyard for you to be able to summon Familiar Possessed Lyna from your deck, sending the Line of the Light Charmer. So I know that this was a big debate, and I know that there was like these email precedents set and stuff like that. Always ask your head judge, but for the most part, the way it is intended to function and the way that it should be ruled moving forward is that you cannot send a Line of the Light Charmer from your spell trap zone to the graveyard to summon Familiar Possessed Lyna from the deck. Alright, so this next ruling question comes to us from Christian, and they ask, if I activate a spell from my hand and my opponent tries to negate the activation of it with a monster effect such as Borreload Savage, can I use Infinite Impermanence from my hand if I have no other cards on the field? So, in my previous video, I said to you guys that if you attempt to summon a monster and your opponent tries to negate the summon with something such as Evil Zarlagia, and at which point you would be allowed to activate the Cyframe Gear Gamma because your monster has not successfully hit the board yet, therefore you are not considered to be controlling that monster and thus not controlling any cards if you don't have any other cards on the field, so you'd be allowed to activate the Gamma. In the case of a spell and trap card, it's a little bit different. So a monster is only considered to have hit the field once the summon is successful. However, when it comes to a spell or trap card, the second they are activated, they are considered to be on the field. It is only at the point in which their activation is successfully negated that they are considered to not be on the field anymore and then sent to the graveyard, but not sent from the field. So essentially, in a situation such as this, say I activate Raigeki and my opponent activates Borreload Savage Dragon to attempt to negate the activation, the Raigeki is still considered on my field until the effect of Borreload Savage Dragon resolves, negating the activation of my Raigeki. So in this situation, you would not be allowed to activate the Infinite Impermanence and chain to the Borreload Savage because you do control the Raigeki. So I know that it's a little bit confusing that spells and traps work differently than monsters do in the case of negating a summon or negating the activation of a card, but all you need to remember is that a spell and trap card is always considered on the field when it is activated up until the point its activation is negated. Once its activation is negated, it is considered removed from the field, it's considered to be nowhere and simply sent to the graveyard, but not from any specific location. This is the reason why True Draco spell traps do not get their grave effect if you negate their activation, because they're not considered to be sent from the field to the graveyard, they're simply sent to the graveyard from nowhere because their activations got negated. But up until their activation is negated, they are considered on the field, so you would not be able to chain Imperm to the Borreload Savage because you do control the Raigeki in the given scenario. Alright, so this next ruling question comes to us from Max Antonio, and they ask a very, very good question. They ask, if my opponent has a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon on the field, and I use Called by the Grave to banish Red Eyes Black Dragon from the graveyard, since Dragoon's name becomes Red Eyes Black Dragon on the field due to Red Eyes Fusion, does its effect get negated? So, Red Eyes Fusion summons the Red Eyes Dark Dragoon and makes its name Red Eyes Black Dragon. So what they're asking is, if you Called by the Grave the Red Eyes Black Dragon in the graveyard, will it negate the Dragoon from the field because the Dragoon now has the name Red Eyes Black Dragon? So the interesting interaction that you need to, pay more attention to is the fact that Called by the Grave reads negate the effects of monsters with the same original name. So what this means is that Red Eyes Dark Dragoon being called Red Eyes Black Dragon, its original name is not Red Eyes Black Dragon. It is now called Red Eyes Black Dragon, but its original name remains Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. So even if you Called by the Grave a Red Eyes Black Dragon in the graveyard, it won't negate the Red Eyes Dark Dragoon on the field because the Dragoon does not have the original name Red Eyes Black Dragon. It now has a new given name of Red Eyes Black Dragon. However, you'll only negate the effects of cards whose original name are Red Eyes Black Dragon, not a new given name. So in this situation, if you Call by the Grave the Red Eyes, it will not negate the Red Eyes Dark Dragoon that is currently on the field. Alright, so this next question comes to us from the Omniscient Omnipotent, and they ask, Lair of Darkness versus Ghost Ogre. If no monsters have been tributed and the turn player enters the end phase, can I still chain Ghost Ogre to Lair of Darkness's end phase effect? So the end phase effect of Lair of Darkness says that you will summon a number of tokens to the turn player's field equal to the number of monsters that were tributed this turn. However, this effect is mandatory, so even if no monsters have been tributed this entire turn, the effect will still activate in order to summon no tokens to either player's field. However, because the effect still activates, you are still legally allowed to activate Ghost Ogre at this point. So do keep in mind, mandatory effects will always activate regardless of whether or not they will be able to resolve. So in the case of Lair, because it's mandatory, it will activate and you can chain Ghost Ogre to the effect of Lair of Darkness. Okay, so this last question, but most certainly not least, comes to us from Grease, and they ask, if I activate set rotation, setting an Oracle of Zephyr to my opponent's side of the field, are they effectively locked out of field spells since they cannot activate Oracle of Zephyr if they are not playing any Zephyr monsters due to the add being mandatory? So essentially, in the case of a field spell such as Oracle of Zephyr, such as a field spell Gateway to Chaos, they both have a mandatory add effect on activation. So what this means is that you cannot legally activate Oracle of Zephyr or Gateway to Chaos if you do not have a target in your deck to add from the mandatory add effect. In the situation where your opponent would set rotation and set Gateway to Chaos or Oracle of Zephyr to your side of the field, if you don't have a target, you can't legally activate the card. So yes, that will effectively lock both players out from activating new field spells due to the effect of set rotation, because neither player will be able to activate that field spell because they do not have a target in their deck to search. So yes, if you do not have a target, you cannot legally activate the field spell with a mandatory search effect. So anyways, guys, that was it for this episode of answering your ruling questions. I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave in the comments of this video your ruling questions so I can go over them and answer them in a later ruling questions video. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for hanging out. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and have a good one.